The smell of fresh gardenias always makes my chest tighten. For most people, it's the scent of spring, of romance, of new beginnings. For me, it is the exact fragrance that hung heavily in the air of my mother's pristine, white-carpeted living room on the afternoon I was erased from my own family. I sat on the edge of the beige linen sofa, my fingers gripping a lukewarm mug of coffee, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Across from me sat my mother, Evelyn, looking immaculate in her pastel blue twin set, her pearl necklace resting precisely against her collarbone. Next to her was my younger sister, Chloe, the golden child whose smile had been the center of our family's universe for as long as I could remember. Between us, resting on the glass coffee table, lay a thick, heavy cream envelope embossed with elegant gold foil lettering. It was the official invitation to Chloe's wedding, a high society event at the grandest country club in Connecticut, paid for entirely by my parents. "Ethan, honey," Evelyn began, her voice carrying that practiced, rhythmic softness she used whenever she was about to deliver a blow. She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her slacks. "You know how much we love you, and we are so incredibly proud of the work you do. Truly we are." I looked down at the coffee in my mug. The work I do was running a nonprofit community center and mobile medical clinic in inner-city New Haven. I spent 60 hours a week ensuring that families who couldn't afford health insurance had access to basic medical care, prenatal checkups, and warm meals. To my mother, it was a charity hobby. To my father, a prominent corporate defense attorney, it was a waste of an expensive Ivy League education. But Chloe chipped in, her voice pitched high, though her eyes remained entirely fixed on her manicured nails. "The guest list for the wedding is it's incredibly tight, Ethan. Bradley's family is very high profile. His father is a state senator, and almost all of the partners from his law firm are coming. It's a very specific kind of crowd." "A specific kind of crowd," I repeated, my voice flat. I looked up, meeting Chloe's gaze. "I'm your brother, Chloe. I'm not a casual acquaintance from college. What are you actually trying to say?" Evelyn sighed, leaning forward to pat my knee, though the gesture felt entirely performative. "What your sister is trying to say, dear, is that we have to think about the optics. Your lifestyle, it's very different from ours. You always wear those flannel shirts, you drive that dented cargo van for the clinic, and frankly, you look exhausted all the time. Bradley's mother is very particular. She already made a comment about that little fundraising video you posted online last month, asking if you were always so bohemian." The word felt like a slap. Bohemian, a polite high society euphemism for out of place. Unacceptable. A blemish on the perfect family portrait. "Mom," I said, my chest constricting as I looked from Evelyn to Chloe. "You're uninviting me to my only sister's wedding because you're embarrassed by what I wear and what I do for a living?" "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Ethan," Chloe snapped, finally looking up, her eyes flashing with irritation. "It's not just about what you wear. You always bring your work into everything. If someone asks you what you do, you start talking about underfunded clinics, systemic poverty, and medical debt. This is my wedding day. It's supposed to be beautiful, light, and perfect. I don't want my father-in-law's wealthy donors feeling uncomfortable or guilty while they're trying to enjoy a 5-course meal. We think it would be best if you sat this one out, sweetie," Evelyn added, her voice dropping to a soothing purr that made my stomach churn. "We'll tell everyone you were pulled away by an urgent medical emergency at the clinic. It fits your persona perfectly anyway. We'll have a nice, quiet family dinner, just the three of us, after they get back from their honeymoon in Greece. Doesn't that sound much more comfortable for you?" I stared at the two women who had raised me and grown up alongside me. I looked for a flicker of shame, a hint of hesitation, a microscopic crack in their polished facades. There was none. There was only a cold, calculated consensus. They had weighed the value of their oldest son against the social approval of a state senator's family, and I had lost. I stood up slowly, setting the coffee mug down on the glass table with a soft, hollow click. I didn't yell. I didn't slam my fist down. The anger inside me was too massive for that. It had frozen into a solid, heavy block of ice right in the center of my chest. "I won't be at the dinner after the honeymoon," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through the fragrant, gardenia-scented air of the room. "Ethan, don't be immature." Evelyn frowned, her elegant eyebrows knitting together. "We are trying to handle a sensitive social situation with grace. You should be supporting your sister." "Goodbye, Chloe." "Goodbye, Mom," I said. I turned around and walked out of the house. As the heavy oak front door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoed in the quiet suburban driveway like the closing of a vault. I got into my dented, white cargo van, the one my mother found so embarrassing, and I drove back toward the city, my hands shaking so violently against the steering wheel that I had to pull over to the side of the road just to breathe. The next 3 months passed in a blur of exhausting, soul-crushing work. I threw myself into the clinic with a frantic, desperate energy, using the physical exhaustion to drown out the quiet, persistent ache of abandonment. My family completely cut contact. There were no text messages checking in on me, no phone calls from my father to lecture me, and certainly no updates about the wedding preparations. I was officially a ghost to them. I learned through a mutual family friend that the wedding was set for the first Saturday of June at the prestigious Whispering Pines Country Club. As the date approached, the weather turned unseasonably warm. The city was suffocating, and the clinic was overwhelmed. We were facing a severe funding crisis. Our primary medical grant had expired, and we were struggling to afford the basic insulin and pediatric antibiotics our patients desperately needed. I was spending my nights writing frantic grant proposals and my days treating patients, living on 4 hours of sleep and cheap diner coffee. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up early. The sun was shining brightly, filtering through the cracked blinds of my small apartment. I knew that at that exact moment, 5 miles away in a luxury hotel suite, Chloe was having her hair styled while my mother sipped champagne. My father was likely adjusting a tuxedo that cost more than 3 months of our clinic's medical supplies. I shook the thought from my head, pulled on a faded blue button-down shirt, and headed down to the clinic. By noon, the waiting room was packed. A young mother named Maria sat in the corner, rocking her feverish 2-year-old boy, Leo. Leo was a regular at our clinic. He suffered from severe asthma and chronic ear infections, and his parents worked 12-hour shifts at a local laundromat just to pay their rent. I knelt down in front of Maria, checking Leo's temperature. He was burning up, his breathing shallow and wheezing. "Maria, he needs a nebulizer treatment immediately, and we need to start him on a specific course of antibiotics," I said, keeping my voice calm to soothe her visibly fraying nerves. "Dr. Ethan, please," Maria whispered, her eyes filling with tears as she clutched the boy tighter. "The pharmacy down the street, they told me the medicine is $200. My husband doesn't get paid until next Thursday. We don't have it. Please." "Hey," I said gently, placing a hand over hers. "Look at me. You don't pay for anything here. We have the medicine in the back. I'm going to get him set up right now, okay?" I walked into the medicine supply room, my heart sinking as I opened the cabinets. The shelves were nearly bare. We had exactly 1 dose of the pediatric antibiotic liquid left, and our nebulizer solution was running dangerously low. We were running out of time. If we didn't find a major donor within the next few weeks, we would have to close our doors, and families like Maria's would have nowhere left to turn. I administered the treatment to little Leo, watching as his breathing gradually slowed and the color returned to his cheeks. By the time I finished checking the rest of the patients, the clock on the wall read 4:30 p.m. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 5 p.m. I sat at my desk, looking at my worn leather shoes, imagining the grand ballroom at Whispering Pines filled with flowers, laughter, and high society toasts. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of profound loneliness. I was doing good work, necessary work, but in that moment, the weight of being completely cast aside by my own blood felt heavier than the crumbling building around me. Suddenly, the front door of the clinic flew open, the small bell above the frame ringing frantically. I stood up, expecting an emergency walk-in. Instead, a tall man in a bespoke, tailored tuxedo burst into the waiting room. He was panting, his face flushed red, his silk tie loosened around his neck. He looked around the room with a look of absolute, unadulterated panic. I recognized him instantly from the political flyers and local news broadcasts. It was State Senator Thomas Bradley, the father of the groom. The man my family was so desperate to impress. He took one look at my faded blue shirt, locked eyes with me, and took a desperate step forward. "Are you Ethan Vance?" he gasped, his voice shaking. "Yes," I said, my brow furrowing in confusion. "I am." "Senator Bradley, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the country club?" The senator gripped the edge of the reception desk, his knuckles turning white as he looked at me with an expression that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Your father, Richard, he told me you couldn't make the wedding because of a medical emergency. But I didn't come here for the wedding. Ethan, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your family doesn't know I'm here. Nobody knows." He took a ragged breath, his eyes darting toward the hallway as if he expected someone to walk through the door. 10 minutes ago, I was in the holding room at the country club with your father. We were discussing a major infrastructure bill, something my office has been drafting for months. He thought he was giving me a legal warning as a friend, but Julian, sorry, Ethan, he inadvertently revealed something that changes everything. The senator's voice dropped to a harsh, desperate whisper. Your father's firm has been handling the offshore compliance audits for my family's private real estate trust. He just admitted to me, quite casually, that he found a discrepancy in our filings from 3 years ago. A massive discrepancy involving unrecorded foreign investments. He told me he managed to clean it up so it wouldn't impact Bradley and Chloe's prenuptial agreement. My blood ran completely cold. I stood perfectly still behind the clinic desk, the faint sound of the traffic outside fading into a distant buzz. "What are you saying, Senator?" "He didn't clean it up to protect my son, Ethan. He did it to hold it over me," Senator Bradley said, his face twisting into an expression of raw, furious betrayal. "He basically threatened me. He intimated that if I don't support his firm's corporate defense clients in the upcoming legislative session, that discrepancy might find its way to the Federal Ethics Committee. My entire career, my family's reputation, everything I have built, your father is blackmailing me with it. And he used this wedding, this marriage between our children to get close enough to pull the trigger." The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. My father hadn't just been trying to climb the social ladder by marrying Chloe off to a senator's son. He had been actively setting a trap. He wanted political leverage, and he had used his own daughter's happiness as the bait. "Why come to me?" I asked, my voice tight. "I don't have anything to do with my father's firm. I haven't spoken to him in 3 months." "Because I know who you are, Ethan," the senator said, taking a step closer, his eyes locking onto mine with an intense, burning sincerity. "Unlike the rest of your family, you don't hide behind a curtain of pristine public relations. I know about the clinic. I know about the work you do here. And more importantly, I know that 3 weeks ago, my office received an anonymous tip about a massive corporate fraud scheme involving one of Richard's primary real estate clients. The tipster gave us specific account numbers, but we lacked the context to verify them. I realized today that tip came from someone inside his circle who wanted to stop him. It was your older brother, Spencer, wasn't it?" My heart did a strange, violent flip. Spencer? The arrogant, Porsche-driving brother who had laughed at me? It didn't make sense. Spencer worshipped our father. He lived for the firm's approval. Spencer would never betray Dad, I muttered, shaking my head. "He would if he thought he was going to take the fall for him," Senator Bradley countered sharply. My investigators tracked the digital signature of that anonymous file. It originated from a laptop registered to Spencer Vance. "He's terrified, Ethan. He realizes Richard has crossed a line into federal extortion, and he's trying to build a life raft before the ship sinks. But Spencer is a coward. He won't come forward publicly. He won't hand over the master encryption keys to the firm's private server. But you have access to the family estate. You know where Richard keeps his private backups." "I don't have access," I said, a wave of bitter exhaustion washing over me. "I was uninvited, remember? I'm an embarrassment to the optics. I don't even have a key to the front door anymore." Senator Bradley reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a heavy, silver key card. "You don't need a key to the house. This is the master electronic passkey to the private executive suites at the Whispering Pines Country Club, the VIP lounge where your father has set up his temporary office for the wedding weekend. His personal laptop and the physical ledger are in that room right now, completely unguarded while the ceremony takes place. He pushed the silver card across the desk toward me. The ceremony starts in exactly 15 minutes. The cocktail hour follows immediately after. You have a choice, Ethan. You can sit here and let your father destroy my family and use my son as a political hostage, or you can walk into that country club, take the evidence of his extortion, and hand it directly to the federal prosecutors who are waiting in an unmarked vehicle outside the gates. I looked down at the silver card resting on the worn wood of the reception desk. The irony was suffocating. 3 months ago, my family had cast me out because they were embarrassed by my clothes, my van, and my lifestyle. They wanted to protect their perfect, high society image from the bohemian son. And now, the very foundation of that image was built on blackmail, fraud, and a desperate, internal war between my father and my brother. If I do this, I said, looking up into the senator's anxious eyes, it will ruin the wedding. It will destroy Chloe's day. Your father has already destroyed it, Ethan, the senator said softly, his voice heavy with a father's grief. He's turning her marriage into a transaction of leverage. If we don't stop him now, Bradley and Chloe will spend the rest of their lives being controlled by a criminal. She deserves better than that. We all do. I stood there for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. I thought about the gardenia-scented room, the mocking laughter, the cold dismissal from the women who were supposed to love me. I thought about Maria and little Leo, who were suffering because people like my father viewed the world entirely through the lens of illegal profit and power. I reached out, and my fingers closed around the cold, silver key card. Get in the van, Senator, I said, my voice hardening into a ridge of pure, unyielding determination. We're going to the wedding. The drive to the Whispering Pines Country Club felt like a descent into an alternate reality. The dented white cargo van rattled loudly as we sped down the smooth, perfectly paved winding roads of the affluent suburbs. Beside me sat a United States state senator in a bespoke tuxedo, his face pale and grim as he stared out the passenger window. When we pulled up to the grand stone gates of the country club, the security guard stepped out of his booth, his brow furrowing as he looked at my rusted van. But before he could speak, Senator Bradley leaned across the console. He's with me, Greg. Let us through, the senator commanded. The guard's eyes widened, and he quickly pressed the button to raise the heavy iron gate. We parked near the back of the massive brick estate, hidden behind a row of immaculate, manicured hedges. The federal agents are in the black SUV near the tennis courts, Bradley whispered, pointing toward a vehicle parked in the shadows. I'll go to the main lawn to delay the ceremony. I'll tell them there's a delay with the officiant. You have 20 minutes, Ethan. Godspeed. I nodded, sliding out of the driver's seat. I looked down at my faded blue button-down shirt and dusty work boots. I was completely out of place among the luxury sedans and sports cars filling the lot, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care about their judgment. I had a job to do. I walked briskly toward the side entrance of the grand ballroom building, using the silver key card to slip through the restricted staff door. The interior of the club was opulent, filled with the faint, echoing strains of a string quartet playing a classical melody on the main lawn outside. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and fresh gardenias. I moved quickly through the carpeted hallways, avoiding the catering staff, until I reached the heavy mahogany door labeled Executive Suite A. I swiped the silver card. The electronic lock clicked, a small green light flashing in the dim hallway. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was large, furnished with leather armchairs and a massive oak desk. Resting on the center of the desk was my father's sleek, black leather briefcase, the one he carried to every high-stakes corporate meeting. Next to it was his encrypted laptop, the screen glowing softly in sleep mode. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stepped toward the desk, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the briefcase. I knew that if I opened it, if I took what was inside, there would be no going back. The Vance family name would be ruined. My father would go to prison. The life of luxury my mother and sister cherished would vanish overnight. I popped the latches on the briefcase. It wasn't locked. Inside lay a thick, manila folder labeled Bradley Trust, Confidential. I opened it, my eyes scanning the pages. It was all there, detailed charts of unauthorized foreign movements, coupled with handwritten notes in my father's distinct, precise script outlining the exact legislative pieces he needed Senator Bradley to clear in exchange for keeping the information buried. It was a textbook roadmap of federal extortion. Suddenly, the handle of the mahogany door rattled. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The door swung open slowly, and the overhead lights clicked on. Standing in the doorway, holding a glass of scotch, was my older brother, Spencer. He took one look at me standing behind our father's desk, my hands holding the incriminating documents, and his glass slipped from his fingers, shattering instantly on the hardwood floor near the threshold. The sharp, crystalline ring of the shattering glass seemed to hang in the air, echoing off the wood-paneled walls of the executive suite long after the shards had settled into the dark mahogany floor. The rich, sharp aroma of spilled scotch immediately flooded the room, aggressively cutting through the heavy, suffocating scent of the gardenias drifting in from the hallway. Spencer stood rooted to the threshold, his arms still suspended in the air where his glass had been a second ago. His eyes, usually hidden behind a veil of smug, corporate indifference, were wide and completely bloodshot. He looked at the shattered glass at his feet, then slowly raised his gaze to meet mine. When he saw the thick manila folder clutched in my hands, the last remaining color drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of translucent gray. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of the booming, confident cadence he used in the boardroom. He slammed the heavy door shut behind him, frantically locking it from the inside. He took 2 chaotic steps toward the desk, his hands trembling so violently he had to shove them into the pockets of his tuxedo trousers. "What the hell are you doing here? How did you get in here?" "The same way the truth got out, Spencer," I said, my voice shockingly steady despite the furious hammering in my chest. I lifted the folder slightly, the heavy paper rustling in the quiet room. "Senator Bradley gave me the key. He knows everything. He knows about the foreign investments, he knows about the fraudulent compliance audits, and he knows about the blackmail." Spencer let out a ragged, breathless gasp, stumbling backward until his spine hit the locked door. He covered his mouth with a shaking hand, a low, pathetic whine escaping his throat. No. Bradley wasn't supposed to find out like this. Not today. Not during the wedding. I stepped out from behind our father's desk, the modern leather chair creaking softly in the silence. I looked at my older brother, the man who had spent his entire life helping our father construct a fortress of wealth and prestige, the brother who had laughed in my face across the dinner table while I bled my savings dry for a community clinic. "The senator told me about the anonymous tip, Spencer," I said, watching him closely. "He knows the digital signature on the fraudulent files belonged to your laptop. You leaked the documents to the Ethics Committee 3 weeks ago. You tried to destroy Dad from the shadows." Spencer's eyes darted frantically around the room, looking at the windows, the ceiling, anywhere but at me. A sudden, manic laugh escaped his lips, high-pitched and laced with pure terror. "You don't understand, Ethan. You've always been on the outside, playing the saint in your little New Haven gutter. You don't know what it's like in that firm. Dad didn't just find a discrepancy in the Bradley Trust, he engineered it. And 3 months ago, when I refused to sign off on the secondary offshore audit, he looked me dead in the eye and told me that if the regulators ever came knocking, my digital signature was the only one on the final authorization tokens. He was setting me up to take the fall for him. My own father was going to send me to a federal penitentiary to protect his own skin." The raw, unfiltered desperation in Spencer's voice hit me like a physical blow. The internal rot of the Vance family was far deeper and more terrifying than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just a lack of love or emotional distance. It was a cannibalistic corporate dynasty where the patriarch was entirely willing to sacrifice his eldest son on the altar of his own greed. "So you leaked the files to save yourself," I murmured, the weight of the revelation settling heavily into my stomach. "Yes," Spencer hissed, taking a frantic step toward me, his hands reaching out defensively. But I didn't want the feds to have that folder, Ethan. That folder in your hands contains the explicit blueprint of Dad's extortion plot against the senator. If the prosecutors get their hands on that, the immunity deal my lawyers are quietly negotiating collapses. The entire firm goes down in a blaze of criminal racketeering charges, and I will be dragged right into the fire with him. I came up here to steal that folder and destroy it before the night was over. He took another step, his eyes begging, filled with a pathetic, childlike vulnerability I had never seen in him before. Please, Ethan.
Give it to me.
We can walk out the back together. I'll give you whatever you want. You need money for your failing clinic? I'll wire you $200,000 from my private account the second the banks open on Monday. Just give me the folder. Don't ruin my life. I looked down at the documents, then back at my brother. The temptation was a dark, twisting thing in my mind. $200,000 would completely solve the clinic's funding crisis. It would buy the insulin, pay the rent, and ensure that little Leo and dozens of children like him would have medical care for the next 5 years. All I had to do was hand a folder to a coward, protect a criminal family name, and let a corrupt senator and a corrupt attorney battle it out in the dark. Before I could form a response, the heavy brass door handle behind Spencer rattled violently. Spencer froze, his entire body stiffening as if an electric current had passed through him. The electronic lock beeped sharply, a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot in the confined space. The master key was being used from the outside. The door swung open, and the imposing, immaculate figure of our father, Richard Vance, stepped into the room. He looked magnificent. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his tuxedo tailored to absolute perfection, a pristine white gardenia pinned to his lapel. But the moment his eyes took in the scene, the shattered glass on the floor, Spencer trembling in the corner, and me standing under the bright chandelier, holding his private manila folder, his expression transformed into a mask of cold, terrifying calculation. Richard didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. He simply closed the door behind him, clicked the lock, and walked calmly over to the wet bar. He picked up a fresh crystal glass, poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Well, Richard said, his voice dropping into that smooth, resonant baritone that had intimidated judges and CEOs for 3 decades. Look what the tide washed in. I distinctly recall your mother informing me that you had a pressing medical emergency at your charitable establishment, Ethan. I see your definition of an emergency involves breaking into my private quarters. Dad, Spencer stammered, his voice choked with panic. Dad, listen to me. Ethan has... Silence, Spencer. Richard snapped, not even looking at him. His cold, analytical gaze remained entirely fixed on me. He set his glass down on the marble counter with a soft click. You've always been a terrible liar, Spencer. Your laptop's digital signature was rather sloppy. Did you truly believe I wouldn't notice the breadcrumbs you left for the ethics committee? I raised you to be a strategist, but it appears you inherited your mother's lack of foresight. Spencer collapsed into a nearby leather armchair, burying his face in his hands, completely defeated. Richard turned his full attention back to me, taking a slow step forward. He looked at the folder in my hands, a faint, mocking smile touching the corners of his lips. And you, Ethan, the righteous son, the boy who preferred to play doctor to the impoverished rather than inherit a legacy. I assume Thomas Bradley gave you that key card? He always was a fragile man. A few legal realities about his family's offshore trusts, and he completely unravels, sending my estranged son to do his dirty work. It's over, Dad, I said, my grip tightening on the folder until the paper crumpled slightly under my fingers. The federal prosecutors are waiting outside the gates right now. Senator Bradley is delaying the ceremony. I'm walking out of this building, and I'm handing them this ledger. You're going to prison. Richard let out a soft, low chuckle that sent a shiver of pure dread down my spine. He walked over to the edge of the oak desk, leaning against it casually, completely unbothered by the threat. Are you truly going to do that, Ethan? Richard asked, his voice dropping to a soothing, paternal purr that made my stomach churn. Let's look at the chessboard, shall we? You hand that folder to the federal agents. I go to prison, yes. The Vance name is obliterated. But let's talk about what happens to your precious little world. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing into two sharp slits of pure venom. I know your clinic's primary medical grant expired last Tuesday. I know you have less than $3,000 left in your operational account. And I know that 90% of the private donors who keep your doors open are corporate clients who route their charitable donations through my firm for tax shelters. The moment I fall, that firm vanishes. The donations dry up instantly. Your clinic will be closed by the end of the month. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick and heavy. Richard's words were a toxic poison, designed to paralyze my moral compass. You think you're playing the hero for Bradley, Richard continued, his voice dripping with malice. But if you walk out that door, you are sentencing every single one of your patients to the gutter. That little boy with the asthma, what was his name? Leo? His parents won't be able to afford his medicine. He will choke on the air of this city because you wanted a moment of petty revenge against a family that didn't invite you to a wedding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, gold-plated pen, sliding it across the desk toward me. Put the folder back in the briefcase, Ethan. Walk out the side door. Tomorrow morning, an anonymous offshore trust will credit your clinic's account with $500,000. A permanent endowment. You can save your clinic. You can save those children. All it costs you is a piece of paper. I stared at the gold pen resting on the dark wood. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The emotional intensity in the room was suffocating. I could see Maria's tearful, desperate face in my mind. I could hear Leo's wheezing breath. $500,000. It was everything I had ever prayed for, served on a silver platter by the devil himself. Was I doing this for justice, or was I just an angry, abandoned son wanting to tear down the father who had rejected him? My hand began to tremble as I reached toward the folder, my mind locked in an agonizing, brutal civil war. Suddenly, the lock on the door beeped frantically again. Before anyone could react, the heavy mahogany door was thrown open, crashing loudly against the interior wall. Standing in the doorway, her breath coming in ragged gasps, was Chloe. Her massive, white silk wedding gown was slightly smudged at the pristine hem from the damp grass outside. Her elegant veil was pushed back over her shoulders, her perfect, high society makeup completely ruined by dark streaks of mascara running down her pale cheeks. She looked at Spencer slumped in the chair, at her father leaning against the desk, and finally at me, holding the incriminating manila folder. Chloe, Richard said, his perfect composure finally cracking as his brow furrowed in genuine surprise. Sweetheart, what are you doing up here? You should be on the lawn. Tom told me, Chloe whispered, her voice shaking violently as she stepped into the room, her chest heaving under the heavy lace of her bodice. She looked at our father with an expression of pure, unadulterated heartbreak. Tom told me the ceremony was delayed because his father left the holding room in a panic. He said his father went to find Ethan. Dad, what is happening? What did you do to Bradley's family? Richard immediately smoothed his features, stepping toward her with his hands extended in a comforting gesture. Chloe, darling, it's nothing for you to worry about. It's a minor business misunderstanding. Your brother Ethan, he's upset because he wasn't included in the ceremony. He's trying to steal private corporate documents to disrupt the wedding. He's trying to ruin your day, sweetheart. Chloe turned her head slowly, her tear-filled eyes locking onto mine with a gaze of absolute, venomous hatred and devastating betrayal. Ethan, how could you? She screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet elegance of the executive suite. She rushed toward me, her heavy silk gown rustling loudly as she grabbed my forearm, her manicured nails digging deep into my skin through my faded blue shirt. Please, give it back to Dad. Don't do this to me. This is my wedding day. I've worked my entire life for this perfect moment, and you're destroying it because you're jealous. Please, Ethan, don't ruin my life. I stood entirely paralyzed, trapped between my sister's desperate tears, my brother's terrified silence, and my father's toxic, calculating ultimatum, holding the fragile destiny of our entire family in my trembling hands. Chloe's nails dug deeper into my arm, her breath hot and jagged against my skin. The pure, unfiltered agony in her eyes was almost enough to make me drop the folder right there onto the polished mahogany desk. To her, this wasn't about offshore trusts, corporate compliance, or federal ethics committees. To her, this was the destruction of the single most important day of her life, engineered by the brother who had been pushed into the shadows. "Look at him, Chloe," Richard said, his voice dropping into that smooth, practiced tone of a seasoned trial lawyer. He stepped up beside her, placing a comforting, heavy hand on her trembling shoulder. "He's always resented your success. He's always resented this family. He'd rather see you humiliated, rather see your marriage crumble before it even begins, just to satisfy his own petty bitterness." "That's a lie, Chloe," I said, my voice cracking under the immense weight in the room. I didn't look at my father. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my sister. I am here because Dad didn't just find a discrepancy in Bradley's family trust. He engineered it. He used your wedding, your relationship, and your love for Bradley as a weapon to blackmail a United States senator. If I walk out of here and give him this folder, I am participating in a crime that will keep you and Bradley under Dad's thumb for the rest of your lives. Chloe blinked, the tears momentarily freezing on her eyelashes. She looked up at Richard, her voice dropping to a fragile whisper. "Dad, is that true? Did you threaten the senator?" Richard's face didn't falter. Not even a microscopic twitch betrayed his thoughts. "I did what was necessary to secure our family's future, Chloe. I secured a prenuptial agreement that protects you forever. I ensured that the Vance name remains untouchable. Your brother simply doesn't understand the realities of the world we live in." "He doesn't deny it," I whispered, looking at her. "He doesn't even deny it." Spencer let out a muffled, hollow groan from the leather armchair, his head still buried in his hands. "He's going to sacrifice us all, Chloe. He was going to let me take the fall for the audit fraud, and now he's using your wedding to lock down a senator. He doesn't care about your perfect day. He cares about leverage." Chloe slowly released her grip on my forearm. Her hands dropped to her sides, the heavy satin of her skirt rustling softly against the floorboards. She took a step back, looking from Richard to Spencer and finally to me. The illusion of her perfect, high-society family, the pristine white carpet, the pearls, the unshakable prestige, was shattering right in front of her eyes, piece by agonizing piece. "Put the folder down, Ethan," Richard said, his tone shifting from paternal comfort to an icy, absolute command. He tapped the gold-plated pen against the dark wood of the desk. "The clock is ticking. $500,000 to your clinic. A permanent endowment. Think of the children, Ethan. Think of Maria. Think of Leo. Don't let your self-righteous ego condemn those people to the gutter." The mention of Leo's name coming from my father's mouth felt like a physical violation. He didn't know Leo. He didn't care about Maria. To him, my life's work was nothing more than a convenient bargaining chip, a line item on a spreadsheet to be bought out and silenced. I looked down at the crumpled manila folder in my hands. If I took the money, the clinic would survive. I could buy the nebulizers, the insulin, the antibiotics. I could look Maria in the eye on Monday morning and tell her she never had to worry about the cost of medicine again. But every single dose of penicillin we handed out would be paid for with the blood of an extortion plot. Every child we treated would be funded by a criminal enterprise. The clinic would no longer be a sanctuary of honest community care. It would be a monument to my father's control over me. "No," I said quietly, the words solid and heavy in the center of the room. Richard's eyes narrowed into two freezing slits. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice rising, gaining a sharp, unyielding strength that seemed to shake the very foundations of the locked office. "You don't get to buy my integrity, Dad. You don't get to use the suffering of my patients to cover up your crimes. I'd rather sleep in the dust of an honest life than live in a palace built on blackmail." I turned away from the desk, clutching the folder tightly against my chest. "Ethan, stop," Richard barked, taking an aggressive step toward me, his hand reaching out to grab my shoulder. But before his fingers could touch my shirt, Chloe stepped directly into his path. Her heavy silk gown ballooned between them, her jaw set into a fierce, desperate line that mirrored my own. "Let him go, Dad," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling but absolute. Richard froze, his extended hand hovering inches from her white veil. "Chloe, you are making a catastrophic mistake. He is destroying your life." "No," she said, a fresh torrent of tears spilling over her dark mascara, though her gaze remained unblinking. "You did. You turned my wedding into a crime scene. Get out of his way." Richard stared at his golden child, the daughter he had spent his life grooming for high society, and for the first time in his existence, he looked completely powerless. He slowly lowered his hand, his mouth hardening into a grim, silent line of defeat. I didn't wait for another second. I swiped the electronic lock on the mahogany door, threw it open, and ran down the carpeted hallway. The faint, elegant sound of the string quartet grew louder as I reached the side exit, bursting through the staff door into the bright, suffocating heat of the June late afternoon sun. I ran past the manicured hedges, my boots pounding against the pristine asphalt of the country club parking lot, until I reached the black SUV parked near the tennis courts. Senator Bradley was standing near the rear bumper, pacing frantically, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me sprinting toward him with a thick manila folder, he dropped the phone entirely. Two men in dark suits immediately stepped out of the SUV, their gold federal shields catching the light. "Do you have it, Mr. Vance?" the lead agent asked, his voice crisp and professional. "It's all here," I panted, handing the crumpled folder across the hood of the car. The offshore transaction numbers, the handwritten notes, the explicit extortion demands against the senator. Everything. The agent opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first few pages with a clinical, rapid intensity. He closed it with a sharp nod, turning to his partner. "Signal the team at the front gate. Execute the warrant." Senator Bradley let out a long, ragged exhale, his shoulders sagging with an immense, lifetime relief. He reached out, gripping my hand in a crushing, grateful squeeze. "Thank you, Ethan. You've saved my son. You've saved all of us." "Go to Chloe," I said, my voice thick with exhaustion. "She's in the executive suite. She knows everything now. She needs Bradley." The senator nodded quickly, turning and running back toward the main lawn. I stood alone in the parking lot, watching the black SUV kick up gravel as it sped toward the grand stone entrance of the country club. The faint strains of the string quartet suddenly stopped, replaced by the distant, rising wail of sirens approaching from the winding suburban roads. The fortress had fallen. The Vance family empire was officially coming down. I didn't leave the country club. Instead of getting into my dented white cargo van and driving away, I walked slowly toward the main ballroom building. I didn't hide behind the kitchen doors this time. I walked right through the grand, double-arched front entrance, my dusty work boots sinking into the plush, emerald green carpet of the reception lobby. The grand ballroom was vast, a sea of white linens, towering floral arrangements of fresh gardenias, and glittering crystal chandeliers. Nearly 300 guests, the wealthiest donors, corporate partners, and high-profile politicians in Connecticut, were gathered inside, their voices a chaotic, panicked murmur. The news of the federal raid at the front gates had already filtered through the crowd like wildfire. At the far end of the ballroom, standing near the grand tier cake, were my mother, Evelyn, and my sister, Chloe. Evelyn was pale, her fingers clutching her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. She was surrounded by a circle of whispers, the high society women she had tried so hard to impress, now looking at her with a mixture of scandalous glee and cold pity. Chloe stood beside Bradley, her hand locked in his, her face washed clean of the ruined makeup. She looked exhausted, but there was a quiet, unyielding dignity in the way she stood. As I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, the room gradually fell into a dead, suffocating silence. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto my faded blue shirt, my worn jeans, and my dusty boots. I was the bohemian son, the blemish on the perfect narrative, walking right into the center of their ruined paradise. Evelyn saw me first. Her eyes widened in a mixture of raw fury and desperation. She took 2 steps toward me, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss that carried across the quiet room. "Are you happy now, Ethan?" She wept, her hands shaking as she gestured to the empty space where my father should have been standing. "You destroyed us. The federal agents just took your father out the back door in handcuffs. Spencer is being detained at the office. The firm is finished. Our names will be in every newspaper tomorrow morning. You've ruined your sister's life. You've ruined my life, and you've thrown our entire family into the gutter." The crowd leaned in, waiting for the dramatic explosion, waiting for the cast-out son to shout, to express his bitterness, to claim his revenge. But I didn't yell. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, looking at the mother who had uninvited me because she was embarrassed by the optics of my life. "I didn't destroy this family, Mom," I said, my voice quiet, clear, and perfectly steady, carrying to the very back corners of the room. "Dad built a house out of blackmail and fraud, and you and Spencer helped him decorate the rooms. You cast me out because you thought my honesty was a liability to your image. But the truth is, the work I do in New Haven is the only thing associated with the Vance name that isn't a lie." Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, her face twisting into a mask of pure, aristocratic outrage, but before a single sound could escape her lips, someone behind her began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Clap, clap, clap. I looked past her. Standing near the head table was Senator Thomas Bradley. He was looking directly at me, his eyes filled with an immense, profound respect. He stepped out into the aisle, his applause growing faster, louder, echoing off the high ceilings. Beside him, his son Bradley joined in, his hands clapping furiously as he looked at me with tears in his eyes. Then, a young corporate lawyer at the next table stood up, joining the applause. Then a local business owner. Then another state senator. Within 10 seconds, the slow clap transformed into a roaring, thunderous wave of sound. The very people my mother had been so terrified of making uncomfortable, the wealthy donors, the politicians, the high society elite, were rising to their feet one by one. They weren't clapping for the Vance name. They weren't clapping for the opulent wedding or the 5-course meal. They were standing for the son who had refused a $500,000 bribe to protect the truth. They were standing for the cargo van, the faded blue shirt, and the calloused hands that kept an inner-city clinic alive. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom, surrounded by a standing ovation from the very crowd that was supposed to reject me. I looked at Chloe, and through her tears, she gave me a small, beautiful nod of gratitude. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled. The Whispering Pines Country Club felt like a lifetime away. My father's trial had ended in a swift, devastating federal conviction. He and Spencer were currently serving time in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania, their corporate assets entirely liquidated to pay the massive restitution penalties. The Oak Crest estate had been sold at auction. My mother now lived in a small, quiet townhouse in Rhode Island, surviving on a modest private inheritance that the courts couldn't touch. She hadn't called me, but she hadn't cursed my name either. The silence between us was no longer cold. It was simply empty. Chloe and Bradley had taken a low-profile trip to a small coastal town in Maine to exchange their vows in a private, quiet ceremony with only a few close friends. They were happy, free from the crushing weight of political leverage and family expectations. It was a crisp, bright Tuesday morning in December when the front door of the New Haven Community Clinic opened. The air inside smelled of clean linoleum and fresh coffee. I was at the front desk, reviewing our latest operational budget, when a courier walked in carrying a heavy, registered package. I signed for it, tearing open the cardboard seal with a faint sense of curiosity. Inside lay a formal legal document from the state health department, coupled with a personal letter bearing the official seal of the state senate. I pulled the letter out and began to read. Ethan, following the investigation into the Vance firm's fraudulent tax shelters, the state has successfully reallocated the seized corporate community benefit funds. I am incredibly proud to inform you that the New Haven Community Clinic has been awarded a permanent, state-backed healthcare grant of $1 million, effective immediately. You told your father that you'd rather sleep in the dust of an honest life than live in a palace built on lies. You were wrong about one thing, Ethan. Honesty doesn't leave you in the dust. It gives you the only ground worth standing on. With deepest respect, Senator Thomas Bradley. My hands began to shake, the paper rustling softly in the quiet waiting room. $1 million. The clinic was safe. The medicine was paid for. The doors would stay open not just for the next 5 years, but for the next generation. Suddenly, I heard a familiar, soft giggle near the front door. I looked up. Maria had just walked into the waiting room, holding the hand of little Leo. The boy was bundled up in a thick red winter coat, his cheeks rosy from the December frost, his breathing deep, clear, and perfectly healthy. He saw me behind the desk, his face lighting up with a massive, gap-toothed smile as he waved a small, mitten-covered hand. "Hi, Dr. Ethan," Leo called out, his voice strong and full of life. I stepped out from behind the desk, kneeling down on the clean floor to meet him at eye level. As I wrapped my arms around the little boy in a warm, solid hug, the last remaining chill of my family's abandonment left my chest forever. I had spent my entire life believing that love and worth were things to be measured in optics, prestige, and the approval of an immaculate living room. But looking around the warm, bustling clinic, feeling the grateful grip of a healthy child's arms, I finally understood the ultimate lesson of my journey. The world will always try to tell you who you are based on the frame they want to put you in, but the only narrative that truly endures is the one you write with your own actions, brick by brick, ensuring that every single line is built on the absolute truth.